My name's Jan McVarish. I'm the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. Welcome to this, I think it's the final session of the day. I always lose track by the end of Saturday. This is a session called What is the Problem with Defining Islamophobia? And it's commenting on and discussing, particularly an attempt by Parliament at the moment to draw up and institutionalise a statutory definition of Islamophobia. But it's obviously a much broader discussion that I'm sure lots of you will be even more familiar with. So we've got an excellent panel, one of whom is on his way. I'll let you guess which one that might be. My colleagues will be not surprised in the least that it's Toby Young who's on his way, probably from a football match. But he'll come and join us. So don't give him a big cheer when he arrives, because that's not fair on the other speakers. I've asked the speakers to concentrate to start with, just to kick things off, on what they think the chief problem is of trying to define Islamophobia in some kind of regulatory form. And we'll work through our speakers and they will help us to guide the discussion. And then obviously, as you know, we'll come out to the floor. So I'm going to introduce them now. First of all, we have Professor Khaled Mahmood. Put my glasses on. Khalid he served as a UK Member of Parliament for the Labour Party for over 20 years for Birmingham Barr, where he played leading roles on defence, foreign affairs and social policy. He also chaired parliamentary groups on counter-terrorism, equality and international relations. And he gained a reputation there for tackling very difficult issues head-on, from extremism and radicalisation to questions of diversity and integration. He's now visiting professor, amongst many other things, visiting professor at Birmingham City University and a senior fellow at the Policy Exchange, which has produced a lot of work on this particular question. And he continues to argue for open debate on sensitive topics, including extremism, social cohesion, and the politics of identity. And then we have Nick Timothy. So we've got a kind of all-parliamentary panel, present or former. Nick Timothy is Conservative MP for West Suffolk. Prior to becoming an MP, he was Special Advisor at the Home Office and at number 10 Downing Street. And he was, until recently, a columnist on the Daily Telegraph. And he's also an avid Aston Villa fan, which that may come up.
Steady on.
And he's also an author, comment writer, and as with everybody else, you can find his writings on Substack. And then we have Amanda Spielman, who I don't know about the rest of the panel, but has certainly been accused of Islamophobia, probably more than once. Khalid, have you been accused? Yes, okay. When I was looking at good company, Trevor Phillips, Sadiq Khan, Barack Obama, and Charlie Hebdo, they were accused of that 2 months after 8 of them were murdered by Islamists, which is a bit rich, really. So Amanda has worked in the public and voluntary and private sectors. You'll probably know Amanda as former head of Ofsted, so His Majesty's Chief Inspector of Schools and Social Care. She also spent a decade with the ARC Schools Academy Trust, mainly as Research and Policy Director, and as probably those of you who are aware of the issue will know that there's been an awful lot of issues and debates about the problem of Islamisation in schools. And she also advises governments around the world on education and is a visiting professor in practice at the LSE. And I will introduce Toby in his absence. He's a British journalist and campaigner. He's the founder and general secretary of the Free Speech Union, my boss, and associate editor of the Spectator and the editor-in-chief of the Daily Sceptic. And he was made a life peer with the Conservative Party in 2024 and is formally known as Lord Young of Acton, as opposed to Loftus Park. Is that what it's called? QPRs? Loftus Park, yeah, okay. Loftus Road, I do apologise to all the hoops out there. Okay, I'm going to ask Khalid to kick us off with his thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. I've been engaged in this since, I suppose, 9/11. When it first started, that was my first year that I entered Parliament, and I saw the way things were going. Even before that, in the late 80s, I was going to my regular MPs talking about the issues of what people like Hizb ut-Tahrir, HT, were doing and how we needed to curb what they were doing. Basically, what they were doing essentially was turning young people away from their own families and parents by telling them, if you're a Sunni from South Asia, that you are a kuffar, you're following the Hindu traditions rather than Muslim traditions, that you're supposed to be, and you're in debt to cultural Islam rather than actually understanding Islam. Sufism is totally banned as far as they're concerned, and this continued trends to Muslim Brotherhood as well. As far as Sufism is concerned, that's not the way you should be, which is totally about understanding the vitals of Islam, which is about peace and oneness with God and one God, and understanding that what you contribute should be far more than what you take from society. And that's the key thing as far as I was concerned. The definitions of the ABPG were deliberately ambiguous. This great word that we'd come across, which is the Muslimness, which they put into their first report. I remember arguing against it when he first came out to Parliament. We had a discussion on this. I also remember pulling up Dominic Greaves, who would read it forward to it, and to which he replied, "Oh, I don't think quite had enough time to go through it." So I think that was a bit of an admission. That the fact that the group still, now the current group that was there, I'm not sure whether it's still there or not, after the demise of Lord Wajid Khan. So we'll have to see what that happens. But what they've done since then is literally transpose that. What the idea of Muslimness and what they're trying to do is, to push the institutions back. They capture the young people, particularly colleges, universities, and prisons. And we shouldn't forget that people in prisons are always harvested by these people. And there's a huge issue with that we need to address in the prison system. So those issues are there because for them to push the institution, push the mainstream community away, and to ensure that you're just targeting those people, you're free to target them. That's why the police and all these institutions back off. Perhaps some of the problems might be happening, that's currently happening at the Aston Villa at the moment, might have been a result of that. And I think there is a real problem with that. We lose young people, our parents lose young people from their society and from their community. There's a big issue with professional women who've gone through, they've been sort of taken away by them and where they end up. And issues of mental health is part of that as well. But what they've tried to do is isolate people from the mainstream community. And that, I think, for me, is the biggest issue that they've had. They've tried to do that deliberately. And because predominantly the Muslim Brotherhood has a very little hold in the UK community, predominantly, as I said again, is predominantly from South Asia, where the communities come from. And so therefore, the issue for them is trying to harvest those people across. And they've done that. They've done that very successfully because our institutions have allowed it, our governments allowed it, local government particularly, has allowed and encouraged it, not just allowed it, encouraged it. Advice in schools, advice in hospitals, advice in government, been by people like Mend and others who totally believe in this. And that's been a real problem for us. And that's why this pernicious definition that they currently have is so scary and so difficult for all of us to be an integrated community and society. Thank you.
Thank you, Khalid. I'll come on to Nick. Sorry, I was going to ask a question of Khalid and my mind's gone completely blank, so I'm going to go straight on to Nick.
Okay, well, thank you. Look, first off, why are we discussing this? We're discussing this because there are some people from within the Muslim population who have extremist attitudes to faith and to power, and they are trying to assert their worldview over the rest of us, over society as a whole, over our institutions, and within the Muslim population. Because a lot of this, I think for us non-Muslims, we think this is about people trying to assert themselves over us. That is correct. But actually, what's often forgotten is that this is a battle for control of normative Islam. And so Islamists are dominating public discourse as it relates to Islam and Muslims, and moderate and more secular and more liberal Muslims are squeezed right out of any kind of debate about Islam and the attitudes of Muslims in this country. And why do they have any chance of success? Why is it we're even discussing these things? It's fear. So there's a fear of violence, as we've seen in places like Batley and the death threats against the teacher who showed depictions of Muhammad. It's a fear, I think, in the Labour Party that they're going to lose a big block of people they consider their voters. And we now see Labour losing seats to people who are standing on platforms with Islamist-related agendas, if they're not Islamists themselves. got to be careful just in case lawyers tell me I can't actually call them Islamists. There's a fear in our institutions, especially in the police and the criminal justice system, of a loss of control, especially on the streets. And I think there's a broader fear among liberals that their worldview, one in which they've been very comfortable with mass immigration, with multiculturalism, isn't the perfect paradise that they predicted it would be. And so there's a kind of denialism, and that's leading to a surrender. So I wanted to say something about the Islamophobia definition, but also the misuse of the Public Order Act 1986, because this year we've seen 2 people arrested and charged for offences under the Public Order Act after burning copies of the Quran and saying things that are offensive to Muslims. Now, this country doesn't have blasphemy laws. We haven't had a state-sponsored trial for blasphemy in England in more than 100 years. And the last one was in the early 1920s. And Parliament repealed blasphemy laws. And the Public Order Act 1986 was passed in a context of some football hooliganism and some street marches by the National Front. And if you look at the second reading debate in Parliament from the time in 1986, not one reference is made to the protection of religious ideas. And yet, sections 4 and 5 of the Public Order Act, which say that it's an offence to create alarm, harassment and distress by using insulting or abusive language or acts, those parts of the Act are being used to prosecute people for being offensive. I hope QPR won.
No, we lost.
Oh. Please say chance, Toby. So this act is being used to arrest and charge and prosecute people for being offensive to Muslims. This is not what the legislation was for. In the case of Hamit Çoskan, who is a Turkish guy who was protesting outside the Turkish consulate, when he was first arrested and then charged by the CPS charge sheet said that he was charged for causing offence to the religious institution of Islam. Now, they quickly withdrew that because there was an uproar, but that is the dictionary definition of blasphemy. But we don't have blasphemy laws, and that's not what that act was intended to do. Mr. Çoskan was found guilty in the court, and because he was attacked by 2 different people, one wielding a knife, and it was quite a violent attack with a knife, I've seen the video. Because he was attacked by 2 different people, the judge in his trial said, that you were attacked is proof that your behaviour was disorderly. He was found guilty because other people attacked him. I mean, in any other context, you would say that was victim blaming, you would say that was madness. Fortunately, thanks to Toby and the Free Speech Union, Mr. Çoskan appealed that, and his appeal was successful. And the judge in the appeal last week made a very impressive and I think correct statement in which he said there are no blasphemy laws in this country, and if free speech means anything at all, it means that you do have the right to offend people. Now, I think in light of that ruling, we need the College of Policing and the Crown Prosecution Service to change their guidance immediately to make it clear to police officers that they should not be arresting people for expressing their views about religious beliefs. And the Islamophobia definition is, I think, if anything, more worrying, because what they're trying to do with the Islamophobia definition is elide the protection of people from harm, which is already illegal under the religious hatred legislation we have, with the protection of ideas and beliefs from criticism and scrutiny and satire and mocking. And if you read the report that was published by the All-Party Group in 2018, they're quite explicit. I mean, they say that narratives about the rape gangs are an example of Islamophobic discourse. This was exactly the problem with the lack of prosecutions in the first place. And they're trying to make it even worse. They say identifying entryism into state entities is an example of Islamophobia, when we know from British government studies, from the report published by the French government, I think it was last year, it's the Muslim Brotherhood. This is a standard part of the Muslim Brotherhood modus operandi. So they're trying to do things to insulate extremists, insulate criminals and wrongdoers from the consequences of their actions. And this is extremely worrying. So at the moment, the government is considering the report completed by a working group that was established to make proposals for an Islamophobia definition. The consultation that working group undertook was a complete sham. They sent the consultation questions only to hand-picked organisations and tried to keep the whole thing secret. Unfortunately, a few of us got our hands on it and we circulated it as far and wide as we could. And I produced a template answer for anybody concerned about this. And they were actually overwhelmed with thousands of members of the public saying, no, this is wrong. But I'm pretty confident that their response to that is to disregard those replies as spam. That's the word that's been used, spam, because they weren't happy with the answers. Now, that group has now handed its report in to ministers. We don't actually know that officially. We know it because one of the members of the working group gave an interview to an obscure website sponsored by the Aziz Foundation. The government is refusing to tell us that it's reported, who was invited to give evidence, who did give evidence, and even what the report of the working group says. They say that it's going to be completely secret. And when I asked ministers in Parliament what they were doing to make sure that organisations they say they won't deal with because they're extremists or because they have worrying relationships with extremists don't take part in the consultation, they said anybody's entitled to do it. The Muslim Brotherhood is entitled to take part in this consultation. The Muslim Council of Britain, with whom the government won't deal, is entitled to take part in this consultation. The whole thing is a very, very dangerous sham, and we will not be free to discuss the root causes of terrorism, the problems with extremism, the relationship between people's ideas and what happened in the attack on the Manchester synagogue recently, or indeed the ideology behind the pressure that was put on public authorities to ban Jewish Israeli football supporters from coming to Villa Park in a few weeks' time. So with that, I will hand over, but it is very worrying indeed.
Can I just ask you both, before we come on to Amanda and Toby, why do you think there's such an inability to recognise Islamism as an ideology that has power? How is it been so successfully claimed that Muslims are the victim? Because one of the things that I read in the reading was just the success, how successful it's been with the claim of Islamophobia, that you can kind of invert fundamentalism and sort of invert the accusation and say, well, no, it's not us people that blew up the Twin Towers or the people who blew up tube trains and buses in London. It's you people who want to be suspicious of the Muslim on the tube the next day or the week after. So how on earth... Why is that? Why have we been so receptive to that idea of Muslim victimhood?
Because politically we've been too scared to take them on. Particularly in my party, certainly, we've been too scared to do that. I tried to ask them if I can come and be a witness to that. I was probably too extreme as well. So I wasn't allowed anywhere near it. So then I made some suggestions to the press. I don't think they were very happy with that either. But the fact is they try and keep people out. I think what we've done is we've conceded too much. And as I've said before, once you concede one, the ladder continues to go up. And that's what the Labour Party needs to understand. That's what people who support them need to understand, is that you will never, ever fulfill the agenda that they're putting forward. So you first of all got the Muslims and Islamophobia group, which is supposed to be an all-party parliamentary group, which gets a report in the floor of the House, which has never really been done before. And so they did that without approval from the government. So the anti-Semitism report was done that, but that had a proper designation from the government to be able to do that. And then it came to the floor of the House. This report didn't. And so that was allowed on there. And the fact was, because there was no real input to try, they came to Birmingham as well, I was trying to get that in. We're just not prepared to take these people on and tackle them. And that's what the problem is. And they continue to have free access to the police, to the local government, to the health service, to the schools, to all those people to do that. And Amanda will know, and Mike will go over, and I played a role in terms of the Trojan Horse schools, where these people weren't. And I still believe to this day, had it not been for Michael Gove, had he not been there, the Secretary of State, we still wouldn't have ended up with the results that we ended up with.
Do you want to, Amanda, and I forgot to say that Amanda is also in the House of Lords, as well as Toby. I've already introduced you, Toby, and I told them they weren't allowed to cheer when you walked in. So Amanda, as formerly head of Ofsted and a proud Islamophobe, you were accused of Islamophobia because of the Trojan Horse scandal, were you?
My first year at Ofsted, we were the Islamophobe of the Year, partly for reporting honestly and fairly on the Trojan Horse, and partly also because I defended a head teacher who said no hijabs for under sevens in her primary school.
That's right. Could you explain what the Trojan Horse phenomenon, in case people don't fully recognise?
Essentially, the governance of some schools in Birmingham had been taken over and was being used in various ways to turn what were meant to be normal state schools into a very different model indeed. And there was enormous pressure on Ofsted not to report it honestly, sustained pressure. And to this day, people will, whenever it's mentioned, people will jump out of the woodwork to say it was an evil Ofsted did something totally dishonest. And Michael Gove, it's not. The reports were absolutely correct and fair and accurate. I think we're in a very strange place as a country where we have Islam and gender non-conformity joint first in the oppression Olympics. Hence the enthusiasm of many young people of being active on behalf of Queers for Palestine. And there is a very popular narrative of unfair treatment, of widespread unfair treatment, which is actually hard to see that much grounding in. The UK generally, every international comparison shows that we actually do a pretty good job on integration, inclusion, welcoming. Relatively speaking, we're right up at the top end in terms of our ability to absorb, value, respect a very wide-ranging population. So I think the pressure for these instruments of various kinds to validate Islamophobia, to validate oppression of trans people, I think this comes down to a need, perhaps particularly for people whose politics are more left than right, to prove how much they care about fairness, to show how much they care about people who are subject to any kind of oppression. It comes to seem like a good thing to shut down discussion and to constrain people explicitly or implicitly from any action that could conceivably be reinterpreted as Islamophobic. I'll also say it's blindingly clear from the last few days' newspapers that it's not Islam that is the most oppressed religion in the UK at the moment. I think this definition is wanted for the wrong reasons. There's an easy precedent to latch onto around anti-Semitism. It may well be that definition really was needed after the war, after the Holocaust, but it has led to this easy conflation. There's an anti-Semitism definition, therefore we must have an Islamophobia definition. But anti-Semitism is about who people are, not about what they believe. But I also think that for religions where many factions don't accept freedom of belief, that distinction is very hard, that is very easy to dismiss or ignore. But it's blindingly obvious that any definition gets weaponized to shut down discussion, to recast expressions of dislike of any aspect of a religion as a crime, and to claim a priority for the defined construct, Islamophobia in this case, over all other concerns and priorities that a government or any part of the state or any other body might legitimately be concerned about. It sometimes is used to justify rejecting sort of deliberate non-compliance with other laws, other social expectations. And as Khalid really talked about, it's very much, from what I saw and learnt directly at Ofsted, about enforcing control and segregation over your own community, in part setting up a purported common enemy or threat to help promote sort of somewhat tribal identities and self-segregation. Islam isn't the only place where these problems arise. I have encountered some, not all of these problems in the context of other varieties of conservative religion, but it's obvious that it's where the challenges for civil society are the greatest. And as Khalid has pointed out, it's often moderate Muslims who are the greatest victims and most likely to be prevented from acting openly and honestly. The bullying of so-called apostates, ex-Muslims, is quite something to behold. And I particularly fear for a definition because I know from more than a decade as a regulator adjacent to government, seeing the extent to which government departments are full of well-intentioned people, do-gooding people, who roll over as soon as religion is invoked. They are ridiculously deferential to any and every identity issue and desperately want to be kind. So even when they're given excellent advice about the true issues underlying, they're incredibly reluctant to stick their necks out. And given the bullying and intimidation, it's quite understandable why you would be reluctant to stick your neck out. I've stuck my neck out more than most, and you do get kicked for it. I'm actually opposed to entrenching identity-related aggravation to any kind of activity or offence. I think it's promoting social division, not cohesion. I spent 7 years having to apply the Equality Act in the context of inspection. And I do think it's bizarre that the people who initiated that act thought that forcing conservative Muslims or, say, Haredi Jews to pay respect explicitly to something like gender reassignment could go well. And in practice, the operation of the Equality Act is providing a platform to argue for this very dangerous definition of Islamophobia. So I am also concerned about the Equality Act, not its objectives, but the approach to promoting equality baked into it, I do believe, needs proper review. I don't think it's working well.
Thanks, Amanda. Toby, do you want to just spell out for us some of the speech consequences of formalising a speech code such as this one?
Yes, well, the defenders of the government's plan to land on an official definition of Islamophobia / anti-Muslim hatred, give it the imprimatur of state approval, and then roll it out across public bodies. One thing when you say, well, won't that have a chilling effect on free speech? Won't it inhibit criticism of Islam? Won't it inhibit discussions of things like the grooming gangs? They say, no, this definition is non-statutory. We aren't going to criminalize, we're not proposing to criminalize Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred. This is a non-statutory definition, and in that way they think they can entirely diffuse the criticism that it will have a chilling effect on free speech. It's also why, as Nick just pointed out, the advice which the working group has now given to ministers, we understand, at the end of last week, the week before last, has been given to ministers in secret. It's not going to be laid before Parliament. MPs, peers won't have an opportunity to have their say to vote on whether or not to adopt this definition. It's non-statutory. Therefore, this can all take place behind the scenes. It can be rolled out, completely bypassing parliamentary scrutiny altogether, won't have a chilling effect on free speech. It's non-statutory. But actually, it clearly will have a chilling effect on free speech. I think the government's hope must be that workplaces, particularly in the public sector, and political parties will embed this new definition in their speech codes, in their policies, and anyone who falls foul of this new definition will be disciplined, put through a disciplinary process. They might even lose their job. They might not be able to stand as a candidate on behalf of a particular political party. Let's not forget the Labour Party, the Greens, the Scottish Conservatives, the Lib Dems, all adopted the APPG's 2018 definition of Islamophobia, and candidates were stopped from running because they fell foul of that definition. Famously, Trevor Phillips was suspended and placed under investigation by the Labour Party because he had supposedly breached the APPG's definition of Islamophobia. And it will clearly have implications for the criminal law and how the criminal law is enforced, even if it's non-statutory. So, for instance, the Crown Prosecution Service, when weighing up whether to prosecute someone for stirring up religious hatred, if the fact that what they've said falls foul of this new official state-approved definition of Islamophobia, I think the person would be more likely to be prosecuted by the CPS. A defence, if you're prosecuted for intentionally causing harassment, alarm, or distress, one defence available to you is, well, no, my behaviour was reasonable. That is a defence if you're accused of that criminal offence. But it'll be harder, I think, to stand up that defence if what you've done falls foul of this new definition of Islamophobia. So it may mean not only that people are more likely to be prosecuted for stirring up religious hatred, causing people harassment, alarm, or distress, but I think juries might well be more likely to find them guilty if the prosecution can say, look, it wasn't reasonable, because it falls foul of this new state-approved official definition. And what I particularly dislike about this government proposal is the very fact that it's non-statutory. I would prefer it to be statutory. I'd prefer to know what the working group said to ministers when they passed on their advice. I'd like this new definition to be put before Parliament, and given that it is going to have implications for how the criminal law is enforced and understood, I think it should be embedded in an Act of Parliament if we're going to do it. And the reason I particularly dislike it is that it falls into a new grey area, which we're seeing increasing amounts of, in which something is sort of prohibited but not explicitly by law. So one of the sacrosanct principles, one of the pillars of English liberty, is the principle underpinning English common law that unless something is explicitly prohibited by law, then it's permitted. Quite different to continental law, in which unless something is explicitly permitted, it is prohibited. You can see why that is an absolute essential bulwark of our liberty. If something isn't explicitly prohibited by law, then it's permitted. Well, where does this new official definition of Islamophobia fall within that spectrum? It's not going to be prohibited by law, it's non-statutory, but nevertheless it will be prescribing certain speech, certain thoughts. It's the same as non-crime hate incidents. They fall into exactly the same grey area. You can get into trouble, you can be penalised. Having an NCHI recorded against your name can stop you getting a job as a teacher or a carer if you're required to do an enhanced DBS check, but it's not explicitly prohibited by law. By definition, the conclusion is you haven't committed a crime, but you should be punished anyway. Prevent falls into this same grey area. You can get into trouble, be referred to prevent for doing things which clearly aren't against the law. Give you one example. I mean, this is absolutely extraordinary. But a case has come across the desk of the Free Speech Union case team of a 14-year-old boy referred to prevent because he drew a picture of Nigel Farage in his art class. As far as I know, that's not explicitly prohibited by law. and yet in some weird way, it's not permitted. So that's why I particularly dislike, I think, this effort to roll out an official state-approved definition of Islamophobia and completely bypass Parliament because it's non-statutory. If only it was bloody statutory, we'd be much better off.
So that if the stated aim is to kind of ease tensions, to protect a minority, to kind of negotiate conflicts between different communities, so say that's what they think they're doing, what do you think the actual effect of it will be? Because I hear and see more anti-Muslim rhetoric than I've ever heard at the moment, more than after 9/11 and more than after 7/7. I mean, there's a code, there's words now. People just have to say the religion of peace, and there's a massive eye roll. Everybody who is very cynical about the idea that Islam is the religion of peace, or now Sharia law has become something that lots of people are talking about. Oh, we're on our way to Sharia law. So what do you think, to what extent are those accusations true and those concerns true? But also, will this actually have any beneficial effect on actual Muslims in Britain, do you think?
No. I think it'll almost certainly have the opposite of its intended effect. I think, yes, it may be that there's been an uptick in anti-Muslim hate crime since October 7th, but there's also been a much larger uptick in anti-Semitic hate crime since October 7th 2 years ago. And that's in spite of there actually being the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. That doesn't seem to have curbed anti-Semitic hate incidents in any way. So why would the equivalent curb anti-Muslim hate incidents? I think on the contrary, by seeming to bend over backwards to protect one particular faith, to create the impression that if you're a Muslim, you are better protected in Britain than if you're a Christian or a Hindu or a Sikh, that will inflame community tensions, not reduce them. And the way, I think, to diffuse community tensions is to get different religious and ethnic groups in communities to talk to each other, to tell each other what they think, to negotiate about what should and shouldn't be permitted in the public square, not to force everyone to bite their tongues as though any conversation, any frank conversation, any exchange of views will automatically mean the lid of the pressure cooker blowing off and race riots ensuing.
Why did Muslims kind of become the pets of the political parties, of the political establishment, do you think?
Partly for electoral reasons. The Liberal Democrats, the Labour Party, particularly tried to do that. There was a small period where the Conservative Party thought that they could get more votes by doing it, but then they set back from that. And I think the discourse that the government had with the MCB was a huge issue as well, and then the Conservative Party stepped back from it, and they're still trying to get in. I think Toby's quite right. I think unless we have it properly legislated for, I've argued from the day that the Islamophobia definition started, is that in Parliament we were there to legislate. If we don't legislate, there's no point bringing anything forward for us to do. If we're going to have any definition, it should be legislated. But there cannot be, I don't think, a Islamophobia definition. There has to be a Muslim hatred definition, which looks at predominantly the issue of employment, about services, and if there is direct religious hatred. That's it. And I think there should be a reasonable threshold for that, which can be defined. Having this ambiguous stuff, I know people that have been chucked out of the Labour Party for so-called Islamophobia. When I know how long I've known them, they're not. Trevor Phillips is somebody I worked very closely with on this, when he's pushed out, but particularly because there were a number of people in Parliament who didn't like what he was saying, and so therefore tried to block him. So I think we've got to be very wary of how we allow this to happen. And I think it's about time we start to address, and there's a lot of people in the Muslim community who don't want this favored status. They actually want to be normal people getting amongst their business. They want to educate their children, and they want to move forward. They want to have good employment for themselves and good areas to live in where their rubbish gets collected. That's all they want.
Just one quick point, Jan, just to say, discrimination, religious discrimination, when it comes to employment, provision of services, is already prohibited by the Equality Act 2010. I think one of the reasons the Equality and Human Rights Commission isn't particularly keen on this project is they think, well, we're already, tasked with ensuring Muslims, people of any faith, aren't discriminated against by employers or providers of public services. And are you saying we're not doing a good enough job? I mean, it's there are already, I think, existing protections in law. We don't need additional legislation, but if we did, legislating would be the way to go.
I think we need to do a lot more unpacking of the difference between hostility to individuals and dislike of beliefs. I sometimes think that a great deal more should be taught about some of the more unpalatable religions, past and present, at school. Once you taught people about some of the fully cannibalistic religions, for example, if you give children a bit more about Aztecs and Incas, they might understand that it's absolutely legitimate to dislike some practices of some religions, which doesn't mean you wouldn't have found another Aztec absolutely charming when you met them.
That sounds very Aztec-phobic.
You'll be getting the award next year.
So look, the clue is in the name, right? We're not talking about anti-Muslim hatred. We're talking about Islamophobia, right? It's about Islam. It's about the ideas. And this is a movement to try to protect the ideas of Islam. And ideas in a free society should always be subject to scrutiny and ridicule if that's what we want to do. And I think the consequences of this are really, really profound. So, we've all got the incident, the murders in the synagogue in Manchester in our minds because they happened very recently. Now, the 2018 definition of Islamophobia says things like, it's Islamophobic to say that Islam was spread by the sword. Now, there are historians who have studied the history of Islam who actually live with death threats because of some of the things they've researched. And of course it's legitimate to actually observe that historical fact. There's an hadith that says that the gates of paradise lie under the shadow of the sword. There's an hadith which is actually disputed by lots of Islamic scholars who say it's inauthentic. But there's an hadith that says that when the judgment day comes, there will be Jews hiding behind trees and rocks, and the rocks will say, "O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, kill him." Right? And that's said to be a saying of Muhammad. Now, as I say, lots of Islamic scholars say that's inauthentic, but lots of hate preachers use it to justify anti-Semitic murders and violence. We have to be free to discuss these things, not least because that will empower the moderate scholars and the moderate preachers and imams to win the battle of ideas within Islam. If we prohibit this stuff, we will never get there.
I think just one thing on hadith is that this is complete nonsense. We've got to get away from hadith. You have the Quran. And the surprising thing recently in Saudi Arabia is that now they're moving away from all the hadith. They're just sticking to the word of the Quran and just sticking to that. They don't need interpretation that was done 200 years in some instances after the Quran was delivered. So I think there's a real issue that we need to get away from that as they do. And I think also in terms of other religions and things that happen we haven't looked at is the Dalit community in terms of my constituency where I was before. If you are a certain class of Hindu, you as a carer would refuse to care for a Dalit in your care. And that's a big issue in the Dalit community as well. So there's certain things that we've got to iron out in terms of religions and the extreme elements of that religion, where the extreme Hindus don't do that. So we've got to look at that, but we've got to really look at what the actual religion is, and we're going to stop being I mean, I had a guy during the last election who completely castigated me all the time, swore at me and did all sorts of things, and he was allowed to get away with it. So I think that's what we're going to look at, is that these people, whether they should be allowed to operate in this way or not.
Thank you. Right, we're going to come out to the floor. So can I just suggest that to start with, you ask direct questions of the panellists, given that you've got, well, our definition of the great and the good up here, I think, certainly lawmakers, past and present, then can we have direct questions first? So put your hand down if it's not a question, if it's a point, and then we'll come to some questions. Khadija, I can see you there, and then I'll come to everybody else. Just down here, stick your hand up higher so that the girl can see you.
Thank you so much. There have been concentrated efforts to blur the distinction between the criticism of Islam and bigotry against Muslims as people. And the organizations such as Muslim Council of Britain, CAGE and MEND, they have a certain degree of affiliation with, Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist organizations. And this has been, documented in the media, in mainstream media. So the line that we draw between the criticism of Islam and bigotry against Muslim, that's being blurred. And I think the efforts to codify Islamophobia into any kind of law, or as Toby said, that it's not a law, it's just a kind of definition that you just want to define it. I mean, I think that's the extension of that effort. And in doing so, I think they have made Islamophobia a synonym for blasphemy, Islamic blasphemy. Lloyd, what's your thought on that?
Okay, thank you. I'll just take the chap next to you if you just pass him the mic. Thank you.
This is really for Khalid, this question. The definition of Islamophobia was previously being driven by Angela Rayner, who's no longer in the government. And I understand that the minister who's now taken over leadership of this is less keen on it than she was. And I was wondering if there was a possibility that it might be dropped altogether. I think the new minister is particularly concerned about the blasphemy connotations, which was spoken about earlier. So the question for Khalid is, might the Labour Party drop this altogether?
Good question, thank you. Do you want people to stand up? Is that what you would... Yeah, okay. So when you ask your question, you stand up.
Yeah, so basically, simply, the answer, I think, is yes. I think Steve Reid has taken a very different approach to what's happening. But also, more importantly, Khaled Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has said that she doesn't think that the government will pursue the definition of Islamophobia. So that makes it much more clearer.
Hi, could we have the mic down the front row, please? Thank you. The chap in the white shirt and the tie. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you mind standing up?
Yeah. I'm curious about how this is all going to end. So I'd be interested to get predictions. In 10 years' time, do you think British people will be more or less free to criticise Islam? And in 50 years' time, do you think British people will be more or less free to criticise Islam?
Okay, that's a big question. So let's have that as something we come back as a group later. And chap here with the beard, whoever's got the mic. If you stand up, sir, then they'll know.
Thank you. My question is, I think in 2024, 38% of hate crimes were directed at Muslims. And after the appalling attacks in Manchester, I think there was a mosque burnt. How do you guys think that we can actually fight against hatred against Muslims? Because it does exist. I think, do you not think it was problematic? I think, Alice, you mentioned, the chair mentioned Alice as the favourite Islamophobe, or I forgot the term you used, but don't you think that's a bit problematic?
Say that again?
There was a certain term used at the beginning to describe Alice as the best Islamophobe. There was something, I can't exactly...
No, she was awarded a prize by the Muslim Council of Britain, Islamophobe of the Year.
Okay.
They didn't mean it as praise.
She didn't nominate herself.
Okay, that's fine.
But I take your point. Yeah.
I take my point. And my question is, how do you guys think we could then fight against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism? What is the way? Because there is indeed hate against Muslims and Jews. What would you say would be the way to deal with them? And just one final thing, Nick, you mentioned Islam was spread, on the base of the sword. I think Malaysia and Indonesia, I don't think there were any wars there, and they're both Muslim countries.
Yeah.
So just a consideration. Thank you.
I mean, one of the examples that I was just looking up Islamophobic crimes recent, and you know, there were three guys jailed just the other week for planning attacks on mosques and synagogues in Sheffield, and they received very heavy sentences. But so clearly there is this thing kind of brewing of hatred, which may not be confined to one religion or the other. It may well be targeting lots of communities. Do you want to just pass the mic in front of you?
Yeah. Hi. A couple of questions.
Yeah, do you mind standing up? Go on.
Couple of questions. Thank you for what you did at Ofsted. Is the new Ofsted chairman a DEI hire? Is my first question. And are our schools safe? And another question, actually based on what this gentleman's just asked, I think goes back to what Bridget Gabriel said about the number of Muslims throughout the world, the number of moderate Muslims and the number of extremist Muslims. And my worry, and maybe one of the things that would solve the problems in general, would be if the moderate Muslims actually stood up more and said not in our name. Would you agree with that?
Okay, thank you. Nick, do you want to pick up on the point of the chap here about the reality of prejudice and hostility?
Yeah, look, I mean, first off, we need to take the emotion out of a lot of this stuff, right? We're talking about laws. We're talking about not quite laws, but things that will have legal consequences. And you know, we've all got experience as legislators, and our job is not to react emotionally, but to think about how things are going to work in practice and what's going to protect people and make this country a better place. Now, Malaysia may not have been invaded. The point is that historians need to be free to study the history of anything, including Islam. And yeah, no, exactly. So I suspect you and I probably agree. Now, the 2018 definition said that it is Islamophobic to say that Islam was spread by the sword. There are people like Tom Holland, the historian, who have gone on the record to talk about living with death threats because he said things about the history of Islam that Muslims don't like. People need to be free to study things, and it's undoubtedly true that Islam, to some degree, in lots of countries that are Islamic today, was spread through battle. That's an historical fact, and I should be free to say that. And that definition would try to prohibit me from saying that. Now, on the point about discrimination against Muslims, it's definitely real. It's a thing. It's a thing that lots of minorities suffer. Actually, increasingly, maybe the white majority has started to suffer discrimination in some contexts. We've got to get away from all of that. And I think we actually already have legislation that, if properly enforced, does protect people. That's what the Religious Hatred Act does. But the difference between what we have on the statute book and what we're talking about today is this deliberate bringing together of the protection of people from actual harm with the protection of ideas from scrutiny. And in a free society, we can just never have that. And the consequences of that restriction on that freedom to talk about beliefs can be seen in the empowerment of extremist organizations and individuals, and sometimes the terrorism that is a consequence of some of that extremism. And I think there's a job for all of us to say, we're going to decide where the line is drawn. I think the British state has been way too passive over time about where the line is drawn. We have to say that in this country, we have an attitude to pluralism, which means that you're free to live your life as you choose, and I'm free to choose to lead my life as I choose. And if you want that, thank you. If you want that, you have to respect my right too. And it's also got to be more than that, because you've got to respect the institutions and the history and the culture and the laws and the norms that led us to this point, which means you've got to respect the inheritance that comes out of British history. And I think if you say, if you accept all those things, if you cherish those things, you're on our side. But if you reject them, you're an extremist, and we're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks. But if you're on this side of the line, we'll do everything we can to support you. Then we're going to end up with a lot less discrimination and a lot less hatred, because we'll understand that actually we can all, I think that they've just got it in for me, I think. It's not a microphase. I think we'll then understand that actually we feel... I've finished.
Well, I did. I'll just say to the gentleman in the front row, I'm an optimist. And the fact that we're sitting here talking today, the kind of work the Free Speech Union does, I think the example of how, having been put beyond discussion, the issues of gender identity are now discussed widely and openly is really encouraging. Whatever your position is, you should want these things to be discussed. On the question in the second row about hatred, I think this is where it's really important to unpack motivations, and sometimes things can be ascribed to hatred that aren't really about hatred per se. I think a lot of the social unrest we've seen in the last few years is really about, to pick up on the popular phrase, perceptions of a two-tier state where immigrants are treated more generously than lifetime residents, or where crime by Muslims is ignored or treated more lightly than crime by others. This is not about hate of individuals. This is where that is the case, it's expression of a resentment, and it may be a misplaced resentment, but nevertheless, it's an important issue for government to address. I think there are times when it's quite important to distinguish, though, between what is an expression of social unrest and what is genuine hatred, and not to apply the hate word every time a crime is committed by someone of one ethnicity or religion or sex or whatever on another, because that way lies absolute social fragmentation and destruction. And the question in the other front row, I don't know, I've yet to, my success has been there nearly 2 years, I've yet to see him put his head over the parapet on anything.
Can I just...
Refreshingly blunt.
Yeah, just in terms of second row, we as Muslims have got to stop deciding who's the right Muslim to lead this. That's what the problem is. We do get hate. We get a huge amount of hate. We've got to understand that if somebody speaks, you can't just turn around and say you're not the right sort of Muslim to do this. We've had just recently Tell Mama funding being taken away from them because people on the group made called for questions in the House of Lords, gave statements in the House of Lords saying they weren't the right people to run issues on Muslim hatred and record them. So we've got to decide, we've got a role to play in this as a community as well. We've got to stop segregating the Muslim community and say who's right and who's wrong. Unless we do that, we've got to get our house into order before we tell somebody else to get your house into order. That's the key fundamental that we need to understand. And of course, I want to find anybody who discriminates against people, who discriminates against the religion of Islam. We have to allow people to speak, but we also have to allow that how we conduct that discussion as well. If we don't do that, then we have a big issue for us to deal with. So I was castigated by this Imam, by the way, whose father and grandfather I know. I grew up in Sparkbrook. I grew up in that area where his father and family still live. Yet he chose to castigate me without even once coming to see me or asking me to go and see him. I was quite happy to go and see him and speak to him. So that's the problem we have, that unless we're prepared to listen to somebody before we make judgment on theirs, the worst thing you can do in Islam is make judgment on another Muslim. Yet we do that all the time. So we've got to seriously look at that and how we deal with that. Just in terms of your question, I certainly hope that we get this better, we get this sorted out. But we both the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the host community, and other religions have all got to make an effort to do this. Louise Casey did a report in the northern towns. There's a number of members of parliament who got up and attacked her, saying that she's only looking at what the community does and not how the host community integrates. Yet nobody's done anything about that since Louise's report of those members of parliament that spoke to put that right. So we can't just castigate people. If you want to make a difference, then we've got to contribute to that difference.
Thank you. Right, let's go out. There's the woman at the back with the mic. Thank you.
As historians have been invoked, I felt like I should speak as I'm a historian at the University of Oxford and have been writing about Islam and Muslims for some 20 years and have never encountered any issues, actually, personally. And I think what we've heard here this afternoon is two things that have been conflated. And one is a very specific, very interesting, precise debate about a particular piece of legislation or something that might end up on or off the statute books. But something else has been a kind of general discussion about Muslims more generally. And I would really like the panel to reflect on their responsibility, their civic responsibility, their public responsibility as people with a platform in how they frame and discuss Muslims more generally. And as an antidote or as a companion piece to this panel, I would absolutely commend to everybody in this room the speech given by Michelle Hussein, formerly of the BBC Today programme, now at Bloomberg, who spoke this week at the University of Oxford, gave the Romanes lecture, and it was about Muslims as human beings. And I would just really commend that to everybody. It's on YouTube. You can access it.
So can I ask you, rather than just saying they should be more responsible, because you might not agree as to what being responsible means, what is it you're saying that they're saying that's wrong about Muslims?
Well, I think the title of this talk was about Islamophobia, and Islamophobia can be two things. It can be a general way of framing and thinking about Muslims, or it can be a very specific legislative act or kind of discussion, as it is in Parliament at the moment. And I think these two things have been really kind of slightly dangerously conflated in some of this discussion.
Do you think phobia is a useful way of framing it yourself?
Yeah, I think
phobia.
It could be. But I'd have liked to have heard, I think there's something here that is about a public responsibility and a civic responsibility that people need to reflect on this panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's a chap standing up behind you.
Hi, thanks very much. So, first of all, Islam is a religion, it's an idea. It's not individuals. I think we need to be very, very clear about that. I wanted to get the panel's views on the current legislation because the Public Order Act, the Religious and Racial Hatred, Section 29, which deals with, first of all, it's a bit absurd because it deals with stirring up religious hate and stirring up hate based on sexual orientation. The two don't really make good bedfellows anyway. But first of all, you've got sections 29B to G, which deal with inflammatory materials, sharing, speaking, distributing, all this in the guise of stirring up religious hatred. And then you get a section 29J, which is a subsection dealing with freedom of expression, which says nothing under this part shall, however, prohibit or restrict any expressions of dislike, antipathy, or even abuse towards any religion or its adherents, or any attempt to I can't say that word, to encourage those members of that religion to leave that religion.
Okay.
So the problem here is already in law, because take an activist judiciary or a directed police force, and they're going to perhaps come down very hard on Islamophobia, maybe, arguably to iron out community tensions or whatever to keep the peace. But they may interpret something that actually, if you apply Section 29J, would be absolutely fine under the guise of freedom of expression. So I think the existing legislation is already problematic.
Okay.
And I'd like the panel's view on that. Thanks.
Toby, deal with the detail, please.
Just to respond to the first point raised, I think we're probably coming at this from different perspectives, but my sense is that lots of public figures, people with a public platform, have been inhibited about calling things as they see them for fear of being branded Islamophobes and, by implication, racists. As Amanda said, she was branded Islamophobe of the Year. I think Louise Casey at one stage was branded an Islamophobe. Many of the Labour MPs who spoke up about the grooming gangs in their constituencies were immediately smeared as Islamophobes. I think one of the reasons the grooming gang scandal has gone on for so long, been allowed to grow and metastasized, and been a cancer in plain sight at the heart of our society. One of the reasons it's persisted and hasn't been dealt with, one of the reasons there still hasn't, the national public inquiry hasn't even begun, is because of this terror people have of being branded Islamophobic. So I think the fault isn't with those people with a public platform who've spoken out about these issues. The fault lies with those who haven't. But it's understandable because they're terrified of being branded Islamophobes and, by extension, racists, which is a career killer. And in some cases, the teacher in Batley means you have to go into hiding with your young family.
And just to take... To take a little historic step back on that one, the first time that I can remember the phobia word really being deployed was in Blair-era government to shut down any discussion of immigration. It was xenophobia was the word that was used. You're xenophobic. And I think the success of that perhaps encouraged others to attach phobia to whatever it is that they want to protect or whatever cause they want to advance as a way of controlling and shutting down discussion. And my concerns are absolutely not specific to Islam. I'm concerned about any issue where the kinds of discussion that are needed to promote good interaction, good reconciliation of misunderstandings and disagreements between people are inhibited or prevented by de facto prohibitions on talking. So I am a huge advocate of being able to talk about the difficult stuff, and that was always what I tried to do at Ofsted, and it's what I'm trying to do now in the Lords, is to try and talk honestly about the difficult things.
I just wanted to say as well, so after I was speaking to teenagers after the Charlie Hebdo massacre, when 8 cartoonists were killed by Islamists for drawing pictures. And I spoke to these teenagers and they said, well, they must have known it was risky. And their sympathy was not with the people murdered. And that was way before this Islamophobia definition came into play. It was already a cultural norm amongst young people that you'd have to be extremely foolish to ever do something as daring as to criticise Islam or Muslims, as it happens with Charlie Hebdo. And I do think that's very dangerous, isn't it? Because that is irresponsible in the sense that these young people are somehow justifying violence and have certainly an indifference towards a mass murder in that case. So I kind of think that this reversal and inversion of some of the accusations of irresponsibility, as Toby says, I do think it's been very successfully inverted, and perhaps we need to turn it back again. Did you want to come up on the law?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the Public Order Act. So it's interesting that you mentioned Section 29J. So the Public Order Act originally in Section 3 was about racial hatred, and then the Blair government amended it to include religious hatred. 29J was the bit the government didn't want. It was a parliamentary rebellion which gave the kind of protection for free speech, which says you're allowed to satirize, mock, etc. And I think it actually only passed by one vote. It was very narrow. The point is, though, that Section 29J of the Public Order Act only applies in law to Part 3 of the Public Order Act 1986 as amended. It doesn't apply to anything else at all. And I actually introduced a 10-minute rule bill in Parliament and tried to amend some government legislation. I didn't get very far. We don't have many Tory MPs, and I'm not very powerful as a result. But I think it's really important that we extend 29J to the whole of the Public Order Act and to the Communications Act and to the Malicious Communications Act, which are the two pieces of legislation that do so much to restrict free speech online. And then I don't think we will see things like people being arrested for causing offence to the religious institution of Islam or to Muslims.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, and
Can
then
I answer?
Can we get a mic down here?
From Oxford is just about to leave. So just 1 second. Basically, the conception of Islamophobia was done by the Runnymede Trust, by Trevor Phillips, when he was there. Then towards 2016-17, it was taken up against the new establishment of the Runnymede Trust, which was supported by Saida Wasi, Nasha et al. On the British Muslims group, where they then ramped it up with the definition that came through, which the Runnymede Trust then supported it. The problem we've got is that we can castigate everybody else, but if you look at the books that Saida Wasi has written, the enemies within, Muslims don't matter, all antagonistic towards the host community, but also firing up the Muslim community that nobody cares about them. What we've got to do is challenge some of those things and those people within the Muslim community, the way that they frame the argument and the debate on this. So we've got to look at this properly and deal with it properly.
Thank you. Right, lady here, and then lots of hands. Do you mind standing up?
Yes, it's just a quick question in reference to the comment you made on Charlie Hebdo. Just wanted to ask, why are you calling Islamists criminal that actually murdered people? And why does Islam has to take a hit? Because a lot of Muslims stood up when Charlie Hebdo's cartoonists were murdered. So I think it is a disservice that you would call them Islamists.
Well, I think that's probably what they'd call themselves. I didn't say Muslims, I said Islamist, as in people with a political project of Islamicization, i.e. killing people for insulting the Prophet. So I think that is Islamism.
No, I disagree with that statement.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Microphone's there. Where's the other microphone? Over there. Let's do some... we need to do the back a bit. So, in fact, halfway up, there's a lady here. Stop. Sorry. There's a lady... Stand up and then she'll see you.
Well, I'm not 100% confident about this, but I'm just wondering, there's been a lot of discussion about the Muslim community, but I'm just wondering, is there something that we need to think about, which is if you think about the extreme way that criticism of opposition within Britain today is seen as far right, is there not something that is about how people who are on the opposite cause are somehow using the whole Islamophobic category as a way of educating those who aren't in the know, who have the right way of thinking. So it feels like an extreme continuation of the anti-working class ideas, because Muslims never used to be called Muslims in England. It was black and Asian. So there's been something that's happened in British politics, which means you've got a transformation of the way that different immigrant communities exist within Britain. You have a whole discussion around religion and identity, which comes from the left. We have done this. It is a homegrown problem that has emboldened other communities. We're putting too much emphasis potentially on the fact that it's the block vote, it's the vote that's stopping people. It's the ideas within the left and within the establishment that have emboldened certain sections of society. And that's where I think we have to give more of the focus in saying, what is it about why people are promoting the idea of Islamophobia? What are the ideas within that they think is legitimate?
Okay, so why has there been an invitation to this particular grievance? Is that what you... Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yes, there's a lady standing at the back.
So we seem to be making a big deal about Islamophobia and using the term and saying this is a blasphemy law. But in my opinion, to an extent, there's already been a blasphemy law in the term anti-Semitism, because if anyone wants to criticise the Jewish faith for what is written in certain books, then you're branded an anti-Semite. So the last time I checked in this country, we had freedom of religion, but if you are to criticise anything that's in the Talmud, as well as if you want to criticise what's written in the Quran and the Hadiths, obviously they're not the Holy Book, but you branded either an anti-Semite or an Islamophobe, I want to be able to criticise those religions and say for what they are, because some of the things are very not compatible with Western society at all, without being branded those terms.
Okay, thank you. There's somebody very keen, so let's have her. I never said this was going to be fair.
So I'm a moderate Muslim, so I'm one of the good, non-scary ones, and I give a lot of thanks to my amazing, awesome parents for making me like that. There was a lady at the front that said the Charlie Hebdo attack wasn't an Islamist attack. I have no idea what you're talking about. Stuff like that is what makes Muslims look bad when you say stuff like that. There's so much I could say, but I want to whittle it down to 3 issues we're having. And I think, Khalid, I'd like to hear your perspective, because as moderate Muslims, I know we see eye to eye. We're not a oppressed group at all in the United Kingdom. We know we're not oppressed. I've never felt discriminated on the basis of my religion. I've felt more discriminated on the basis of my social class, being working class. I think that's another discourse. When you said that there's Muslims in this country that want to live properly and freely and just be normal, there were some people in this room that scoffed. You guys are the issue because you isolate us moderate Muslims and make us feel like we're the minority. No, we're actually the majority. Then the second group is obviously the Islamists, who I hate. And then the third group is, and I have a complex relationship with them, is the progressive white liberal group. Because I know they're coming from a place of kindness, but they're not always helpful. Like, I remember in college, I said, I hate Shamima Begum. She can't come back to the UK. And they were like, Saba, you can't say that about her. And I was like, but why? He's like, because la, 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 la. And I'm like, you're not even Muslim. You're literally not a Muslim, and you're not even from my religion. You're telling me that you're deciding on my behalf how I should feel about an Islamic extremist. And then there was also, I had a white liberal progressive teacher who reported me to the school because I made a joke about wanting to marry my crush. And apparently he was scared I was going to be sent off to Pakistan to marry him. It's a hard and weird complex existing being Muslim. And I feel like I could never say the right thing because these 3 groups that I've mentioned, the Islamists, the liberal white progressive people who I know are trying to be nice, and then the people in this room that were scoffing at the idea that there's normal Muslims in this country, come to Kilburn, my Muslim community, and I will show you normal Muslims, and you're going to have a great bite to eat. So that's just my opinion.
If you drink, you're going to have a lot of drinks bought for you. If you don't, maybe pass them on to somebody else who does. Yeah. There's a chap here with the stripy t-shirt. If you stand up, because you know who you are, and then this guy can get the microphone.
Hi. Just a few points. I think there is already legislation we've got in the Equality Act where you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their faith. I think it's also it's also an aggravating factor if you commit any crime due to the religious identity of the victim. So isn't this completely redundant? This whole Islamophobia creating this new class of crime or of whatever you want to call it, isn't it completely redundant? So then my question is, since there are already sweeping protections against discriminating and committing crimes against people based on their faith, the people who want to promote and who want to introduce this notion of Islamophobia into our laws, what are they actually after? And I think we do not have in this country any faith that is protected by law. And I think the actual purpose of introducing Islamophobia as a concept is to protect Islam from criticism. And that is anathema to the way we do things in this country. Christians in this country are used and have to put up with seeing their savior mocked and ridiculed in the media. Jews have to say, I don't know how many cartoons I've seen in my life with Moses parting the Red Sea and some joke being made on his behalf. Muslims, all 3 categories that were mentioned before, need to understand that in the West, we take the piss out of religion.
Right, you might, sorry, in fact, just behind you there, and then I think that might be it on the question front.
Very good.
10 minutes left. Thank you.
How do I follow that? So I was interested in what the panel's thought is on interference with Article 9 of the ECHR when it comes to other religions within the Islamophobia definition. So everyone has the right of freedom of thought, conscience and religion. I wonder what the panel's thought is on that. I'll illustrate with a couple of examples from my religion. I'm a Sikh. So in Sikh history, this year we're going to mark the 350th anniversary of the martyrdom of our ninth Guru, Tegh Bahadur, who was beheaded for standing up for Hindus who were being forcefully converted to Islam by a Mughal emperor. So that's the 350th anniversary. We mark that martyrdom anniversary. According to the APPG definition that Khalid has mentioned, that expression of Muslimness is a real problem, but they've specifically specified that if you say that, I think Mr. Timothy said this, that if you say that Islam spread by the sword and subjugated minority groups under its rule, that's Islamophobic, therefore it's equated to racism because Islamophobia is a type of racism. So Sikh history and other history of other religions is a risk. The other example I will give you is that for Sikhs, halal meat is strictly forbidden because we feel it's inhumane and we believe that especially non-stun slaughter, and we also believe that praying over an animal when it's dying is superstition. That's our belief as Sikhs. Halal is strictly forbidden, as is kosher. Now, according to the APPG definition, that would be deemed as an expression of Muslimness because it's diet. Therefore, what is going to happen with the definition of Islamophobia? You're going to create a hierarchy of religions. One set of religions are protected from criticism. People who have other beliefs which are not consistent with that will be accused of hatred. And yeah, so going back to my initial point is, what are your thoughts around potential interference in Article 9?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Can I bring the panel back along this way? Toby, do you want to just respond to...
Yeah, I'll just respond to a couple of points. For the points made by the last speaker were all fantastic, and they were points made in a letter written by a Sikh organisation to... that's you, is it? No, well, that was a fantastic, fantastic letter. So, great stuff. Written, I believe, to Steve Reed and the working group. Interesting, this alliance that has sprung up between the predominantly white radical progressive left, Zach Polanski, Owen Jones, radical conservative Islam, and eco-zealot Greta Thunberg. Quite an unusual coalition, and Amanda referred to Queers for Palestine, some tensions in that coalition. And I've been trying to think of a way to label it so we all know what we're talking about. The best I've come up with so far is the People's Front of Sharia. But if anyone can do better, I'm all ears. A gentleman asked, a gentleman pointed out that there are already more than adequate legal protections. There's the Equality Act, there are the offences against stirring up religious hatred, and as you said, if a crime is motivated by hostility towards the victim's religion, then it's a religiously aggravated crime and attracts a higher tariff. Why do we need additional protections? What's really going on? Well, I think the answer must be that the Labour Party is trying to provide a sop to Muslims that they're worried might desert the Labour Party at the next general election. It's cynical political manoeuvring because of the Gaza supporting independence that won last year. That I think is pretty clear. Finally, someone asked, well, what is the prognosis? Do we think the government is going to go ahead now that Angela Rayner has been replaced by Steve Reed? Shabana Mahmood seems, I'm not sure she's unequivocally said no way, but she certainly made some negative noises. The cabinet is clearly divided on this issue, and my feeling is that whatever they're likely to do, or whatever they're considering doing, is probably going to be a fairly diluted version of the APPG's definition of Islamophobia, which won't work as a sop to those Muslims angry that the government isn't doing enough to protect them from anti-Muslim hatred, Islamophobia. So I think politically the sensible thing to do would be to abandon it. But if they don't, I can assure you that the Free Speech Union will be bringing a judicial review on the grounds the argument is occupying the field. The field's already occupied. So the battle won't be over if the government does decide to press ahead.
So if you'd like to support that project, then do go to our stall, which is, well, you can't miss it. There's loads of people there and lots of things to see and do and buy. But you can buy membership of the Free Speech Union, which is very reasonably priced, I can promise you.
Amanda. Really good discussion and so many interesting questions. I'd just like to emphasise the importance of discussion and the importance of de-escalation in that. If we start with labelling behaviour in anything that is expressed as an ism followed by a phobia, then onto hatred, we create a sort of trend which it's very hard to pull back from. So please, I think everybody here can contribute to discussing these really difficult and sensitive issues in ways that help to de-escalate and take things forward and ultimately build a better and more cohesive society.
Thank you, Amanda.
I'd just like to end by actually saying something that's maybe a bit more uplifting, because in this country our political system is binary. If you're in opposition, you don't have any power. If you're in government, you have it all. And sometimes it feels like this stuff is just heading in one direction. But actually, because of events like these, because of things like the Free Speech Union, because of the bravery of people like Khalid, actually the intellectual climate is changing. People were not gathering to talk about these things 10 years ago. People were not organising to resist these things. And the intellectual climate changing means that we can still win. And I know the judiciary is supposed to be independent and completely uninfluenced by things like news and politics and intellectual fashions. But actually the reality is I think it is influenced by those things. And that ruling by the judge last week was fantastic. The fact that they thought they could get away with having a secretive consultation on the Islamophobia definition, only to find out that they couldn't, and there was a big rebellion and thousands of people wrote in, is a really, really positive thing. And, they probably are going to do something, and maybe it is going to get slightly further away from us, but it does feel like we're in a much stronger position to resist these things, and in the end, for our arguments to win. So I just want to end with that positive thought.
Thank you. If I can just try and address the lady over here about the question that she raised, where we got to Islamophobia. I just very quickly, if I understood it correctly, it all started predominantly in the 80s, where people like HT and others took control of our universities and took control of our students and then took control of our prisons. And that was the big flaw that we made as an institution, as a nation, in terms of allowing these people to get away with it. Once they got away with it, then more people were empowered. Certain people came into politics and predominantly driven by those ideas, who were further there to promote the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's formalized from Hizb ut-Tahrir, HT, into Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, there's a big issue of where all the funding came from. I know that there's big concern about funding that's come here for specifically some of these organizations. And I believe some work's being done on that. But we haven't really challenged them. In the last 25 years or so, at least, we haven't challenged any of it. And as everybody says here, Toby says, we're right to do that here. And that's where it starts, is that we've got to stand up to it. And not just for the sake of everybody else, but purely for the Muslim community as well. It's important for the Muslim community that we stand up, because they need support, they need protection from these people who are taking their children away from the parents and families that we've got, and we've got to stand up for that. That is the key thing that we want to do. I want to congratulate the young lady over there, her parents particularly, for putting all the effort and giving her all the dependence that she needs. The Sikh gentleman here, the Mughal King Babur, who was responsible for the death of that. His first act was when he came into his throne. He locked away his father and his brothers so they couldn't take over from him. So I don't think it was a very good example of Muslims anyway. But yes, there was Barbary in terms of what had happened there. And I just want to thank everybody here for coming. And let's keep this discussion. Toby, thank you for all the work that you do, Chair. Thank you all for the work that you do. I think it's important for all of us. I know Professor Spielman has done a huge amount of work in relation to that. Toby and I have known each other before he was an MP. I think we continue to do some of that work. It's important for all of us to do this. It's important to protect and support the most of the Muslim community that want to carry on with their lives, want to be part of the British society. They don't want to be a Muslim enclave within the United Kingdom. They want to be a society, part of the whole society. And all of us need to support that and work forward, and hopefully we'll get there sooner than the next 10 years.
I just wanted to thank as well and to give credit to my colleague Max Thompson, who's not here, but he basically produced this session and came up with suggestions for speakers, invited them and wrote a description. So thanks to Max for that. And hopefully you'll watch the video and then you'll find out that I thanked him. So thanks very much for coming. Enjoy the drinks.